Good morning and welcome to Plus Sports on Plus TV Africa. My name is Mikhail Tinubu. Welcome to the show. It's Tuesday and of course, aside from the World Cup, there are other sporting events taking place all around the world and even right here locally in Nigeria. Fakorede, Adekalu of Rivers and Tima Godbless of Delta won the men and women's 100-meter final at the ongoing National Sports Festival in Asaba. Fakorede won the 100-meter title in a new personal best of 10.25 seconds, while Sunday Akintan came second in 10.32 seconds, with Nicholas Mabilo coming third in 10.34 seconds. In the women's final, Tima Godbless of Bielsa won the 100-meter title in a time of 11.32 seconds, while Delta State got the silver and bronze medals, respectively. Now, I have with me on the show Gboyega to discuss some of these stories. Gbenga, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. A pleasant morning to you.
Thank you so much. I was speaking to a friend last night, and he was asking me about the level of investment that goes into sports in Nigeria, and particularly what other sports aside from football take precedence in the country. What other sports are people watching? What other sports is the government supporting and sponsoring? And this, for example, the National Sports Festival seems like just such an example of how the government is diversifying resources into athletics. How significant do you think such competitions are to our place in the world compared to where we are in football? Because sometimes it seems like we hear more successes being had in basketball, in football, in basketball, in athletics, particularly athletics, more so than we hear of our footballers gaining any sort of praise on the international stage.
Yeah, so every country in the world do have that sport that cut out for them, that is dominant for them. If you go to the America, you'll be surprised that football is not the number one sport. It's the NBA. You go to India, for example, you go to the Asian countries, it's cricket. Other countries is rugby. When we come to this side of the world, we focus more on football. So it may not be totally intentional. It just could be conditional.
Yeah, but that said, my thing is, football is obviously our first love in this country, but it's not the thing. It's not the thing that brings us the most success. And sometimes a question can be raised as to whether there is more effort being put into other sports like athletics, because we keep hearing of under 18s, under 20s, successes at different levels in the sport.
So it begins with priorities. I understand you perfectly. It begins with priorities, because whatever actions you take, it only shows the intentions you want to achieve. Because if your action shows that you are only versatile, you are only up and doing when it comes to football, and even football is not just, it doesn't cut across all platforms, maybe only the men's football or only the men's national team, because the age grade groups are suffering, the women's team are suffering, the league is suffering. So when we talk about football, it's not as if it's just a general thing. So it's about priorities. Once the priorities are set right, once we know the end game, the big picture, what do we want to achieve as a sports nation? Once that is clear, then we can work towards it. And how do we work towards it? Like you said, we know what brings us more successes. Why don't we pay attention to it? Why don't we build infrastructure around it? I was privileged to be under the press conference of the sports minister a few weeks ago, and somebody mentioned the fact that why don't we make inter-house sports, as basic as it is in schools, compulsory? Because from there, that is what we talk about grassroots. Grassroots is not just mere say. It is from the schools. It's when these people catch them young. Once the fundamentals are gotten right and the intention is also clear, that success is not far-fetched.
Well, in terms of the kinds of successes we're seeing in athletics, Particularly for this festival, this sports festival. Adekalu Nicholas Fakorede, who just won the 100-meter gold medal for men's. For example, he was number one in the top 8. He has an honor summary that features him in the top 8 at World Under 20 in championships. He also featured in the top 8 at African championships and he is the current national champion. So it begs the question that when you see all of these successes, sometimes it tends to seem like these athletes come into the public sphere. They become popular for winning something, and then they kind of tail off. Is it a lack of consistency on the part of the athletes to improve themselves, or is it just that the people who are creating these events, the government who are sponsoring it, once they have used them up, for lack of a better term, once they've used them up to showcase the efforts and resources that is being put into the competitions, then they are no longer relevant?
Well, the wise ones around us will tell us that the job is not becoming successful. The job is remaining successful.
Yeah.
So some people achieve success. We see it in the music industry. We see it in the entertainment industry. A one-season wonder. You just bring in that hit and we don't hear about you anymore. It's because sometimes it's about the individual effort not connecting with the system in place. So most of these individuals, they spend a whole lot to train themselves. Some of them, if you hear their stories and the coaches that they grew up with, it is self-sponsored. So when they do all those to achieve one success, what they need is a structure that keeps them afloat. But they don't have that structure to fall back in. So they have to fall back to another 2, 3, 4, 5 years of struggling to get capital to sponsor themselves again for when next they ever have an opportunity. But if there is a structure in place where once you're successful, or even once you feature, you belong to an association, you belong to a union that monitors your progress. That is the whole essence and idea of academy when it comes to football. Because it's not about the club you represent. Once you represent your club, you see that growth from under 15 to under 16.
So you would say the same model needs to be established in place for other sports.
Absolutely. It is the reason why football is the most to be reckoned with, because everybody you can go and pick up the records of Pele and see how we went through current days. Let's not even go back to the Stone Ages. Current days, you can go and pick up the records of Haaland and see where he played even before under 15. But most of these athletes, like you say, they just come into the scene. One season wonder, they take a bronze, a silver, a gold, and we don't hear about them anymore because nobody monitors their progress. These guys are self-sponsored. They can't keep maintaining except their
I definitely take your point, because even with all of the sourcing for funds, sourcing for resources and support, at the end of the day, when these athletes get to the finish line and win the gold, the resources that comes with that does not pay off enough.
Exactly.
It's not a significant enough payoff at the end of the day to justify the resources that they've put in. So going back to the same sources, the same wells to gain the same resources, those people who might have had faith and sponsored in the beginning might no longer feel like it's worth it for them. You're definitely right about the academy situation. For example, Southampton's academy is very revered in England. Same thing with Arsenal's academy. And if you are an alum of such an academy, it does a lot for your CV to say, yes, you passed out, you were revered in that academy, and therefore you maybe justified a trial at Arsenal or at Manchester United, Man City. If you break out from the academy and don't choose not to sign a professional contract with the likes of Southampton or even elsewhere in Europe. But it would be interesting to see what the kind of successes we could gain with that sort of model.